Hello and welcome to this episode of the Academic Papers Podcast, where we celebrate academics and bring education to everyone. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a paper by Kazi Imran Hossain, and it really got me thinking about the way we learn English. It explores how culture and language are really intertwined, which might seem obvious at first, but the implications for teaching and learning are fascinating.
Yeah, you're right. It's so easy to think of language learning as like just a technical skill. You focus on grammar rules and vocab lists. But this paper highlights that language is so much more than that. It's a reflection of a culture's values, their beliefs, ways of seeing the world even.
It's like when I was traveling to different countries, I could technically communicate in the local language sometimes, but there were so many times when I felt like I was missing something, like I wasn't really getting the nuances of what people were saying or doing.
That's exactly what the paper calls communicative competence. It's not just about speaking grammatically correct English, it's about understanding the cultural context. That's what gives words meaning. It's about knowing when to be direct or indirect, how to use humor right, and how to read between the lines.
So it's almost like you're learning a whole new way of thinking and interacting with the world when you learn a language.
Exactly. And that's why the paper argues that incorporating culture into teaching English is so important. It's not about making it more interesting or engaging. Well, it is, but it's about giving students the skills they need to actually communicate in real-world situations.
Right, and the paper also talks about how neglecting the cultural aspects can create challenges for both learners and educators. I was reading about how some English learning materials can even perpetuate stereotypes about different cultures or accents.
Yeah, absolutely. Those stereotypes can really hurt a learner's confidence, and they create this very narrow view of what it means to be an English speaker. Imagine learning English from materials that only show one accent or one culture. You might start to feel like the way you speak is wrong or not good enough. It can be really discouraging.
And it makes you think that English belongs to one specific group when it's really a global language now.
Exactly. It's used by people from all walks of life. That's why educators have to be so careful about the materials they use. They need to show how diverse English really is.
For sure. The paper also mentions those cultural misunderstandings that can happen in the classroom. That seems tricky, especially with students from so many different backgrounds.
It can be. What's polite in one culture might be rude in another. Think about personal space or eye contact, even how you disagree with someone. All of that can be different depending on your culture. If you misinterpret things, it can get awkward or even hurtful.
So teachers need to be like cultural ambassadors almost, helping students understand and appreciate those differences.
That's a good way to put it. They need to make a classroom where students feel comfortable, sharing their own culture, and asking questions when they don't understand something. And they have to address those misunderstandings well, sensibly, in a way that helps people.
It makes sense. And the paper also talks about how educators need to be aware of their own cultural biases too.
Right, that's really important. We all have different backgrounds and our own ideas about the world. Those biases can affect how we teach without us realizing it.
So it's not enough to just talk about diversity. Teachers need to think about their own views and make sure they're not accidentally creating an environment where some students feel left out.
You got it. It's about being aware of how your actions impact others and making sure everyone feels seen and respected for who they are and where they come from.
It all makes sense, but I imagine some educators might feel overwhelmed by trying to include all this in their teaching.
It's a big change, but there are more and more resources out there to help teachers with this, to develop those skills and create a learning environment that's sensitive to different cultures.
So where do we start? The paper mentions some specific strategies and opportunities, right?
It does, like using different kinds of materials and technology to connect students with people from different cultures. Those are good places to begin, to make learning more inclusive and engaging.
Those are great starting points. I'd love to hear more about how to put those strategies into practice.
Let's do it. You mentioned diversifying course materials. So the paper talks about going beyond textbooks, using literature, films, music, even artwork from different cultures.
Right. Instead of just reading about a culture, students could actually experience it through art or stories. I
Yeah.
think that would make a much bigger impact.
Absolutely. Like, imagine a class reading a novel by Chinua Achebe or watching a film by Satyajit Ray. They'd be exposed to different styles of English, but also to different worldviews, cultural values, ways of expressing humor. It could really open their minds about what English can be and how it's used around the world.
It sounds much more engaging
Yeah.
and a much richer way to learn a language.
The paper also mentions using technology to connect students with people from other cultures.
Yeah, like virtual exchanges,
Right.
online forums, or video conferencing with classrooms in other countries. I remember when I was learning French, we had pen pals in Quebec. It was so cool to get letters from them and learn about their lives and culture. I bet those connections would be even stronger with today's technology.
Oh, for sure. Imagine students working on projects with people from other countries, discussing current events, or even just chatting about everyday life. Those real interactions can be so motivating, and they help students understand the language and culture on a much deeper level.
Not to mention they'd be exposed to all those different accents and dialects, which is great for their listening skills.
Exactly. It helps them get comfortable with the diversity of spoken English and move past the idea that there's only one right way to speak.
That makes sense. But all this talk about connecting with other cultures makes me wonder, how do we make sure those interactions are respectful and actually meaningful? I mean, there's always the chance of cultural misunderstandings.
Oh, you're right to bring that up. It's not enough to just throw students from different cultures together and hope for the best. Educators need to facilitate those interactions. And they need training in intercultural communication so they can be sensitive to how things might be miscommunicated.
So you need to create a space where students feel safe, to ask questions, share their views, even make mistakes without being judged.
Exactly. It's about fostering that mutual respect, where everyone feels valued and heard.
That reminds me of something else the paper talks about. Culturally responsive teaching. It's about more than just acknowledging differences. It's about actively incorporating students' backgrounds into the classroom.
Right, moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach and recognizing that students learn best when they can connect what they're learning to their own lives and their own cultural identities.
So like if you're teaching history, you could have students research their own family history and see how it fits into the bigger picture.
That's a great example. Or in literature class, you could include works by authors from different cultures so students can see themselves and their cultures reflected in the stories.
It sounds like it's about letting students be themselves in the classroom and valuing the unique perspectives they bring.
Absolutely. Creating a learning environment where everyone feels seen, heard, and celebrated for who they are.
And speaking of celebrating students for who they are, the paper also talks about using students' native languages in the classroom, which sounds counterintuitive.
I know it seems like it would get in the way of learning English, but actually research shows that it can help. When you acknowledge and value students' first languages, it can improve their English.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, for one, it can make them more comfortable, more confident in the classroom. When their language and culture are respected, they're more likely to feel like they belong and to participate.
Yeah, it tells them that their native language is a good thing, not a bad thing, which is really important for students who might have faced discrimination because of their language.
Absolutely. And on a cognitive level, being able to compare their native language to English can actually help them understand both languages better. They start to see patterns and connections.
So instead of seeing their first language as a problem, we should see it as a tool that can help them learn English.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that all languages and cultures have something to offer, and that embracing this diversity makes learning better for everyone.
And the paper gives some specific examples of how to do that, right?
It does. Like, teachers could encourage students to share proverbs or sayings from their cultures, or have them translate short texts back and forth between their native language and English.
It would be amazing to have a truly multilingual classroom where students can learn from each other's languages and cultures.
It's a great way to make learning more inclusive, more engaging, and it can help students appreciate the beauty of language itself.
We've talked a lot about creating a culturally responsive learning environment, but what about assessment? How can we make sure we're testing students' English fairly, especially with all the different cultural backgrounds and learning styles in classrooms today?
That's a crucial question. The paper says we need to move beyond those traditional standardized tests, the ones that tend to favor certain cultural groups.
So what's the alternative?
We need to use a variety of assessment methods, methods that let students show what they know and can do in ways that are authentic and meaningful to them.
So things like portfolios, presentations, maybe project-based learning activities, where they can actually use their language skills in real-world situations.
Exactly. And the feedback we give them should be culturally sensitive, too. It should take into account their learning style and background.
So instead of just focusing on grammar errors, teachers could point out what the student is doing well in terms of communication, and maybe offer suggestions for how to adapt their language for different cultural contexts.
Right. It's about recognizing that there are many ways to be a good English speaker and appreciating all those different styles of communication.
This has been a fascinating look at how culture and English language learning are connected.
Mhm.
What are your biggest takeaways from this paper?
Well, I think one of the key takeaways for me is that we can't think of English as just one language with one set of rules. We need to be open to all the different ways people speak and use it all over the world.
Absolutely. And the paper really makes you rethink what it means to be fluent.
Yeah, it's not just about grammar or knowing a lot of words. It's about being able to communicate in different cultures
You need to understand those subtle things, be aware of your own biases, and be able to change how you speak, depending on who you're talking to.
and be willing to learn from others, to appreciate how different cultures engross the English language.
This paper has really got me thinking about how I learn languages and how we teach them.
It's a challenge to all of us to think about those cultural aspects of language and to make sure everyone feels welcome and empowered in our classroom.
To learn more about this paper, you can go to academicjobs.com and search for Kazi Imran Hossain.
The way we teach and learn English is always changing. And this paper shows that embracing different cultures isn't just about being politically correct. It's about understanding language on a deeper level and creating better learning experiences for everyone.
So what was the most surprising thing you learned from this deep dive? How can you use these ideas in your own language learning or teaching it?